To cover the whole story fairly, my dad originally was a Pequot Indian that was brought in to Massachusetts at Penobscot Bay. He was a quarryman. He quarried marble and granite for graveyards. Then, in the process, he was married at the time, and he gets a divorce in about 1888. He gets a divorce. He comes out to Butte, Montana on the first train on the Northern Pacific Railroad. He lands in Butte, Montana, where he becomes a miner. And then he got the big hassle with the unions. And so that was back in the homestead days of 1888. He and his stepdad, who was married to his wife, who had been divorced before, they got on horsebacks in Butte, Montana, and went into the Yak River, which is a distance of about 300 miles on a horseback, and got 360 acres on a Homestead Act that was put through to get people to come out to the west and live on 160 acres. So Dad and my grandfather they had 320 acres, and of course the Yak River in those days was a valley about like the Bitterroot is, and just most of the homesteaders migrated there from up in Canada, because it's 17 ranches, actually 27 miles away from the Canadian border. And so most of the people that migrated into there was Doukhobors that were run out of Canada during a racial riot back in the 1800s, late 1800s. So Dad homesteaded. Then on come the act of Congress in 1805, they started a Forest Service under a fellow named Gifford Pinchot, and Dad, he was a surveyor. He got on with the government, and then he became a supervisor of the Kootenai National Forest that was based in Libby, and then he worked up to the Flathead National Forest, which was in Kalispell. So Dad moved from the ranch down off of the ranch down there in the Yak River. Then he moved to Kalispell because he's a supervisor. And then this the year that he heard about they were going to cut down their giant forest, which is where Ross Forest, and he goes over and takes his carbine with him and shoots the radiators off of a bunch of trucks that was owned by Peter Hewitt and Company, who was going to log these giant trees off. Well, in his process, he got canned out of the Forest Service, but later on got a better job with the Northern Pacific Railroad on the land grant deal and as a fire warden, and so things turned out pretty good. And then he proceeded to have 6 rotten kids, which I'm one of them. I proved my point.
Tell me about talk about the time when you were in the truck, the old Dodge vehicle, and you ran into the grizzly bear, and he bumped the grizzly bear with the front of the car.
Well, okay. Well, this is it. When Dad was still an active, he was a smoke chaser for the Forest Service, which incidentally in those days a smoke chaser was paid $30 a month, but he had to feed the horses, and that was the top pay in the Forest Service. And now they got a bunch of morons that they get twice as much pay. Anyway, this was the day he was going up to a mine. That's where he had a 27 Dodge, and we was going up to a town called Silverite. They had silver mines, silver and gold mines, and Dad was in on that operation. So we started out about 4 miles from the ranch. There was a silver-tipped grizzly ambling up the road to the north towards Canada, And my dad, he couldn't resist. He come up behind the bear and bumped him on the back of his legs with a bumper on the actually, I'm wrong, the gods was a 1923. And, and so the bear, the bear kind of got off the ground shaky, so it kind of reminded me of a bunch of the goddamn Democrats at the last election shaking his head. Anyway, Dad, he always carried a gun. He pulls it out, and I thought he was going to maybe shoot the bear. As young as I was, I knew better than that. But anyway, he gets up and he walked up the road, and then the bear all of a sudden turned around, one big swipe with the radiator on the car. Those days was right up front. The whole radiator and the sheet metal and fenders went sailing off across the highway into the trees next to the highway. And the bear, he just slowly turned around and went ambling down the road to get the hell away from us. And thank God my dad didn't try to shoot him, because that wouldn't have bothered the bear a bit. He'd have probably ended up eating us alive.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, that was in the days. The rest of the story, Dad actually, at this town of Silvernight, which is lays right alongside the Yak River, Dad had a little placer mine that produced roughly about 1 to 3 ounces a day. Well, that's when gold was about $3 an ounce. And so Dad had these flumes that they poured mercury in to catch the gold. And that was his bread and butter, because nobody could live on $30 a month even in those days.
Could you take off your glasses?
Huh?
Could you take off your glasses? Thanks. It's reflecting sunlight back.
Yeah, I can't see.
Oh, but...
But then Dad was, of course, a big shot in the Forest Service under Gifford Pinchot. And the Forest Service had just been formed. Of course, western Montana at the time, they estimated it had more forest than the whole state of Maine and New Hampshire combined. And, well, it's true today. Only nobody can get that wood or burn it right up there now. I can see the smoke.
Could you talk?
These are those goddamn Democrats. There's still enough Democrats around that law and order don't mean anything as long as they got politics.
Tell about the old telephones.
Oh yeah.
And the two long and 3 short rings.
That was in the back days.
In Prohibition.
Days of Prohibition had come in, and so alcohol was banned. My dad, the Yak River was totally inhabited by bootleggers. Actually, all the booze, which was rye whiskey, was shipped into Butte, Montana under a hollowed out load of logs. And they put, all the booze was put into sawdust and gallon jugs and put up into this logging trucks on the bottom, which is cut out and looked like a regular logging truck. The guy that was hauling the booze, I don't remember, his name was Lewis Fellerly. He lived in Eureka, so once a month he'd make a trip from Eureka over into the Yak River Valley and pick up all the booze, which was in gunny sacks and sawdust. And that was hauled clear into Butte, Montana, by the way of Libby, Kalispell, Missoula, and then into Butte. And that was the basis of, well, it kept all the bars running during Prohibition days. And of course, everybody else was in the bootleg business too, that wanted to make a living. But
tell about the time when the revenuers would show up.
Huh?
When the revenuers would show up on the telephone.
Oh, yeah. Well, in the process, one day the Model T Ford, my grandmother had the switch system, had the telephone board for all the telephones in the Yak River, which in those days was done by ringing bell, the dial of, and they were like one long and two short. Everybody had like, it was all based on run longs and short on the ring up. So these revenuers showed up, and she had a code. There was a warning code, was to put out all the fires. Was like 3 longs and 2 shorts on that telephone system. Just warned people that they had sills to put out the fires, so the revenuers wouldn't arrest them and throw them in jail. And so she rang. They came up, and in the process, there were 4 of them in the car, and nobody ever saw them again. Then one day, the FBI came up looking for them, and they found them up in a place called Pinkham Creek. It was a bunch of Southerners that had migrated into the Yak River that was run out of the deep south in the bootleg days. And anyway, they finally found the car had been cut up, and the bodies were there too. With the 4 revenuers, they were full of bullet holes. Of course, that was what they call the Yak River justice system. That's about it. Oh, other guys, the Yak River. I lived there 7 years, and of course, if you haven't lived in the Yak River for about 7 years, the people, it's the only valley in the United States, and everybody carries a sidearm, because you know it's legal to carry a sidearm as long as it's visible. I gotta cut my stove here, just get some heat. And the Yak River in those days was the upper Yak. That's where they got the name. Is an animal called a yak, which is spelled Y-A-K. These are animals that came out of northern Russia up in Siberia, and they brought them into Canada, and evidently they were turned loose, and they came down into the north end of the Yak River because that was a primitive area. And the yak, of course, was an animal that had a fur on them, but thicker than sheep. And a lot of people in those days wore yak skin coats, and then also the meat. In Siberia today, that's one of the biggest sources of food and clothing for the people that live in Russia, especially up in the northern Siberia type of Russia. And then, now there, in the early days when I was homesteaded northern Yak, there were a herd of buffalo, and they were running. Evidently, the Canadians ran them out of Canada because buffalo had the ability. They didn't pay any attention to fences. They just, when they wanted to go somewhere, if their fence got in their way, they'd knock it down. And so my dad had about 3 buffalo and a couple of yaks. And then, of course, they lived on white-tailed deer in winter. It was like white-tailed deer and venison stew. And of course, one thing about the Yak River is the short summers that were very, you could raise it. My dad had an apple orchard. So these huge apples, they were Washington and wine snap. He got $1 a box, so he finally cut down all the trees and used them for firewood. That was in the big Depression days.
Talk about some of your when you came to Missoula.
Huh?
Talk about when you came into Missoula, when you moved to Missoula.
Well, like my dad, after the incidents with up at Ross Forest.
Yeah, and the Ross Forest is there today. It's a national park.
That guy Ken.
Yeah.
So he lost his job in Libby over that deal incident, messing around with.
But he saved those trees. They're still here today, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Tell everybody where the Ross National Forest is.
Ross Forest is a patch of timber that lies on the boundary line of Montana and Idaho, about 30 miles from the Canadian south of the Canadian border. Now, that area right in there is a sort of a rainforest type that has lots to grow these giant cedars. You have to have a lot of moisture, and the reason they think the climate there is very moderate because of the prevailing westerlies, and they come over the mountains that drop a lot of moisture. And that's these cedars was according to the experts, and they cut through them, and they estimated some of them were 3,600 years old, which was at the time was before Christ was even supposedly on earth, if there was any such thing. Which that's why one of the reasons I don't believe that story. Somebody's just making it up.
Okay,
anyway, these giant cedars, for example, one, and now about, when the forests were around 1805, they were discovered by a crew of Forest Service guys who were timber cruising, and they found these giant cedars, and so they had a bid on it from the company with Peter Hewitt, who at the time was a logging company based in Spokane, Washington. And they came in there, they came in to that valley with the intention of cutting down all these cedars and making, that's in the days of cedar shake roast. And they were going to cut them down. Well, my dad, who was a real environmentalist, and put a stop to it, but in the process, he lost his job with the Forest Service, which is the best thing that ever happened, because after that, we got free passes on the Northern Pacific Railroad, 2 new cars a year, and his salary jumped up to around $3,600 a year from less than $1,000 a year. And that was the best thing that ever happened. At least it was for me, because then in the summertime, I had a golden pass. I could travel everywhere in the United States free. It was the good old days. Oh, I don't know if it'll ever come back either. I don't think it will.
Talk about when you were living in Missoula and you went to school at the university, and then you wound up going to Los Angeles.
Oh, well, the reason I ended up in Missoula because that's where my dad's work was. Actually, he was living in Helena with the NP Landing. And I came to Missoula, and of course, another reason I had 6 sisters, and my mother wanted to make sure that they was able to get a college education. Well, then the war came along, and I ended up down in Los Angeles. I was waiting for the war to progress. So then I got on with Lockheed Aircraft, and that kept me out of the infantry, so I stayed there 3 years. Then they finally got desperate, and I signed up with the old Army Air Force. Otherwise, I'd have been in the infantry and probably been dead long ago.
Talk about your times in Los Angeles when you were making the airplanes. Talk about the planes you built, the P-38s, and working with Duke Ellington's band. Talk about when you worked with Duke Ellington.
Oh yeah, well that was I working at aircraft. Pay started in at 51 cents an hour. So that's at the time I had a license or musical card. I had played a trombone. So, and the war was going on in LA. You had a lot, roughly, my estimate, I'm talking about 16-piece bands. Now, these aren't like the music today. These bands where they had they had like the average band have 4 trumpets, 5 saxophones, 3 or 4 French horns, a drummer, a pianist, and even a xylophone, and the musical instruments, a lot of radio. Anyway, the minimum requirements in the musical band in those days was 16 pieces of brass. So that was in the years when Duke Ellington was a black band. I was carrying a card, so the night I got off shift, I'd go down, and Duke Ellington was playing at the Paramount Theater right in downtown LA. So the whole reason the guitar, I'd get on there because I could read music. So I'd go down because the scale in Los Angeles during the war was $18 an hour, probably better than anybody in Montana makes today. And but then there was, there wasn't only Duke Ellington. There's Earl Father Hines, Cab Calloway, and I could go on if I had a list of probably 100 major musical outfit, because you got to remember the population of Los Angeles during the war was roughly, as near as I could find out, 5.5 million people. Today, it's 17 million. But anyway, that's one. Well, LA is probably, as far as this jazz and all this other music, is probably #1 in the world as far as music today. Well, your son would verify that after he's been down there.
Yeah, talk about the Palladium and the dance floor. The dance floor in the Palladium, how it was constructed with the floor and the balls, the rubber balls. Remember when you danced, the floor would move? Remember how when you danced in the Palladium, the floor would move?
Oh, about that dance floor?
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, the plane. To get back to Los Angeles, I went down there 39. The Palladium was a dance hall that was built by a rich. He was in the oil industry up at Santa Barbara, and this Palladium was built in the center of a block, and it could hold 500 couples, and it was the favorite hangouts of all the big bands because of the humongous crowds they had there during the war. The thing that was unique about it actually was built. They followed the guy that built the big musical set up for the Mormons in Salt Lake. It was a dome type structure that you could drop a pin on the floor and you could hear it bounce. Same thing as in the music department of the Mormon church in Salt Lake City. Anyway, the floor was laid an octagonal, so that the building was an octagonal, 8 sides. The floor was laid so that when you were dancing with a grain of the wood, and underneath it was mounted. The floor was mounted on millions of rubber balls, like sponge rubber type. So when everybody was dancing, the floor would move up and down to the rhythm of the music. And it was the only other place that, to my knowledge, that I know of, that was like it was the Shriners Temple in Helena, Montana. After the war, that's where my dad was living, and I go up there, and one night we go down there, and that floor was mounted on rubber too. Well, the city of Helena, when they bought the building, here comes the bad news. I'll have to answer the doorbell.
Okay, I'll turn it off then.
Anyway, they tore all the rubber balls up. That was a sad deal. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll turn off. Okay, cool. We're ready now.
This is Now, this is got after the war. You know, why I want to really tell you.
You got a barbell on the floor there.
After three years in Los Angeles dodging the draft, my deferment ran out because for a friend of mine, I hauled him home to Missoula, Montana. It took me 3 days to drive him up here to save his life. Guess what? They canceled my 90-day deferment, so I ended up in the Air Force fighting for these worthless goddamn Americans. I know. If I had to do, I let them line them up by the firing squad.
Tell them about the planes that you fly. You need to talk about what you did at the factory. What you were building and doing in the factory. You didn't tell about that. The P-38s.
Yeah.
And the wiring. You need to talk about that a little bit.
Well, that's what I get around to.
Okay. Yeah.
Work at Lockheed. Got on there, and at the time I was 26. I was building P-38s, Hudson bombers, Vega Ventura bombers, and it was all doing subbing for Boeing aircraft. And at the time, I originally went to work for Lockheed in '39. That was before the major war in the region. I went down there after I got out of high school. It was the only town you could get a job. So and then I went back down there. I came home for a couple of months, and then I went back down there because the draft lord was breathing down my neck. So that's the reason I went to work at Lockheed. Was like all yellow-bellied Americans. I was trying to stay out of the military, and I knew at the time I had a private license that I got in Missoula, Montana, from you know who.
For flying, right?
Yeah.
Your flying license, yeah.
Yeah. And so after I got on Lockheed, I thought this, was just temporary, because when I went to work for Lockheed in '39, we didn't have any draft boards and anything like that. You got to realize that war came on in a hell of a hurry on account of what the Germans did to the Jews.
And you pretty much you pretty much were building the dashboards and the wiring controls.
Well,
you could read schematics and blueprints.
When you work at an airplane company, started me in on landing gears, and then that's just landing gears. What you do, you pull them up on a cable and drop them 150 feet to test them for what happens to an airplane when you make a bad landing.
Mm-hmm.
And from the landing, then they transferred me to wiring dashboards underneath it. I was laying on my back, I spent more time laying on my back than Michelangelo and all my prostitute girlfriends. Somebody always got stuck with a dirty job, and the reason they put me on it because if you ever wired the dashboard on P-38 involved about over 1,000 wires, and you have to swear under oath that you're going to do this to the best of your ability. Well, there ain't too many guys want to sign away their life, because if something goes wrong there and somebody gets killed in one of them that you wired, you're going to get blamed for it. So it makes you a little cautious. Same way when you're packing parachutes, about once a year they come around and make you go jump out of an airplane with one of the parachutes you pack. And I guarantee there'd be a lot of Americans who would give up on a deal like that. But get back to dear old Lockheed, that's 3 years I spent at Lockheed. This gets me up to 1942 with the war. The war that we were having at the time was damn near over. The war we were fighting was Japan. Actually, that's what we got in the war, was the Japs hit us first, and then we went in a total war later on. That's over in Europe. The Japs actually, we gotta thank the Japs. They got the average American out.
And talk about the planes that you flew when you joined the Army Air Corps. Talk about the planes you flew.
well, the planes that flew, well, in the Army Air Force, of course, to start in in those days, you had to have 80 hours of acrobatics. That means he's able to fly an airplane upside down is just as good as you can, right? So it took me, I spent in over training periods, it took over a period of 4 and 5 months just to learn how to fly an airplane like that.
Where did you do that?
I was in Denver, down in Nevada, in Reno, Nevada, up in Washington, D.C., out of the Johnson Flying Service, and it's covered about 15 air bases. And then, of course, you had to learn how to fly. They had artificially, with instruments, they have you in a link belt machine. I learned that in Denver. In other words, hey, I spent more time in training than I ever did dropping bombs on women and children over in Romania.
But you were moving them around a lot too, weren't you?
Yeah.
And you had to test that. You would go out and check the gas tanks before you flew them. And
well, yeah. When I finally got in the regular Army Air Force, I was the oldest guy in the outfit, and the only reason they ever took me in is because I had a
commercial
private license.
Didn't you have a commercial license too then?
Huh?
Didn't you have a twin engine license also?
Well, I worked up to that.
Yeah.
Then when I got in the military, and I learned to fly. Well, I got multi-engine ratings. That's four engine ratings, twin motor ratings. I also have an instrument rating, which means you can fly when you can't see the ground. And then I got a license for an A&E license. That's aircraft and engines. That means you're qualified to tune up an engine on a military airplane, which is today, if I still, that's what I'd be working for the military, probably be over in Iraq tuning up motors right now. But I'll give one thing about the military. It taught me a hell of a lot about airplanes that I ain't going to learn reading in a book.
Talk about the different planes that you flew, and where was the base that you were based in?
Huh?
Tell about the base that you were flying from.
Oh, what did I
in the desert.
After I got in the military?
Yeah.
Well, I'd say I flew about most of all my air bases was in the western United States. And I probably, for example, Denver, and down in Texas, and then up in Washington, and then I went clear down into Nevada and Southern California. And then I did get a couple of weeks of an air base over in North Dakota, and another one that was just across the river over in Omaha. In other words, hey, the military is just like all Americans, a bunch of shitheads.
But what?
I'm telling the truth. They just keep moving you around because they didn't know what the hell to do.
But weren't you on an English air base too? Weren't you?
Well, when I finally signed up to go in the military in the old Army Air Force, I finally, after all this, and I got out of Lockheed, I ended up in an English air base, which is up in Iran, the tip of Iran, a town called Bazurgi, and that was run by an Englishman. And the Englishman, what most Americans don't know, that the English hate the Americans worse than a pile of dog shit. And I don't blame them, Mike. I'm beginning to hate them too, because I can't.
Well, they've never gotten over the fact we stopped being a colonial puppet of theirs and became a free, independent country.
Yeah.
You know, they still hold a grudge.
The old guy's air base, the English air base that was a good training, because one thing about England that most Americans don't realize, the English and the Canadian people, 99% of those people don't let some son of a bitch like the President of the United States, they are free thinkers. they think what they think, and the hell with the rest of the world. And that's the thing I learned flying off that English air base, is that the English people, because the Germans rather, were bombing them every day with those airplanes that were pilotless. They had them beat down in the war. If we hadn't stopped those airplanes operating out of France, there probably wouldn't be any England today. So you got to give Americans a little bit of credit when it comes.
Yeah, we saved their sorry asses in 2 world wars.
Yeah, right.
We saved the French and the English in World War I and World War II.
And well, to get back to Lockheed, I'd say 90% of Lockheed, for example, built an airplane that was called the 1011, which is still flying today. Delta Airlines is flying them every day over to Honolulu. And another thing, those airplanes, the 1011 was built to fly the goddamn military tanks, German tanks, over to North Africa during World War II. And in fact, Jesus Christ, that's 54 years ago. That's what I still was building them. They're still in use today. As a matter of fact,
the DC-3s are still flying too. DC-2s.
If the Forest Service is so goddamn interested in safe airplanes, get those 1011s that Delta, they're all parked down in Salt Lake City. They want to sell them. But the government, if they have those 1011s, I remember in my lifetime, only wings that fall off of a 1011 is the ones the Germans shell. That's what the government needs. Those 1011s to fight forest fires. And the 54 is the same airplane. But anyway, that English air base is Montgomery. It was run by George Montgomery. And the one thing I'll say about the English, they aren't like, they don't even think like the average American, because they have been bombed, they have been, hey, and don't forget they lost millions and millions of lives versus 500,000 less than 500,000 Americans. So all I can say is the military, every country's military system is strictly controlled, and the only way the average guy could even stomach a military is you have to take an oath that you won't go AWOL. It's just the toughest deal I ever got involved in, and I know I had it easy in the Air Force. The thing about the Air Force is you never ever, being up off the ground 10 to 20,000 feet, you never see anybody die, so it's more impersonal than a type of war where you're in a trench and you're fighting face-to-face combat. I never did it, but I talked to people that had, like that guy upstairs, and that's a different deal.
Talk about the different engines and the different aircraft that you've worked on and flown.
This is an incident. See, after I came home, I started a flying club in Missoula, Montana, because I was interested in flying, called Rocky Mountain Flying. It got up, it developed into about 7 fairly late model airplanes, only one twin motor and all the rest are single motor. So to get back to the old story, along about 1955, that's the Johnson Flying Service. That's where we had our airplanes. My dad was this the end of the east and west runway was right in our backyard here. So Dad came up. I was out there working part-time, and that's where I got to learn to fly. And Dad come out there. It was a clear day, and he said, "Hey, how about with all these flying club?" He says, "Why don't you take me out flying?" And he says, "There's about 100 small fields in northwestern Montana." And he says, "I always wanted to, like you say, to see the only way you can see the country is from the air, which is true because you can see a lot of things you don't even see on the ground. And so I made a mistake. I said, well, yeah, I'll take the day off. And so I took him flying. We hopped up to Kalispell, over to Kyla, Montana. These are all small fields. And then we ended up landing in Troy, Montana. And that was this country that Dad knew. So then there's a Kilbrennan Lake up north of there, was had a landing strip, was privately owned. So I decided, well, we'll fly up there. I called the guy on the phone and got permission to land. And so I took Dad up there. And so then we had one more. A friend of his had a ranch right on the Montana-Idaho line where Highway 2 goes out of Montana. And he said, his name was Francis McCormick. He says, let's go over there. So I flew him over there. Well, make a long story short, we eventually got back to Missoula, and I found out my dad, in about 3 hours of flying, he could land and take off as good as I could with $20,000 of military time. But military, this is a light airplane, there's a lot of different. So after that, every morning when the sun, which is, in those days, the sun came up around 5 in the morning in summer, I had to take my dad, go out to Johnson's Flying Service and take him flying. Geez, after that I couldn't sleep in anymore. This went on for 3 years. Well, then he up and died, or otherwise I'd still probably be doing it.
Oh.
One thing about flying, and there's something limited.
Isn't there a lake named after your grandfather up in the Yak?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well,
what lake? Is Lake Vinyl Lake, right? Vinyl Lake? It's Vinyl Lake? Vinal Lake? It's named after your grandfather?
Well, my dad's name was Vinyl. He surveyed the whole Yak River as a Forest Service, and so then when he surveyed, and there's a lake on there. Originally, there's a homestead. He was going to homestead on this lake, but it turned out that some guy with a lot more money, my dad, decided he wanted that lake now. It's privately owned, and that's the final lake. And then there's got Pete Creek. That's named after his grandfather. Last time I got a map up there, it said, made by Leslie F. Vinyl. That was my father's name. He surveyed, and his surveying was so accurate that the Coast and Geodetic Survey has never changed. There's that map. Of course, it shows that Dad was actually, he had a surveyor's certificate that he got and enrolled in a correspondence course from MIT. That's Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's the one that taught me how to build houses. He could overhaul a car, and my dad was a pretty smart guy. But he didn't have a college degree, but neither does Dennis Washington, and he's a billionaire. And if I had to listen to him, I told that story. He's the one that told me to quit wasting my time going to high school.
Talk about when you worked on the dam.
Oh, well, after the war, there's a dam called the Knoxon Rapids Reservoir that was being built by the same guy that was doing logging, that's Peter Keough and Company. They defaulted. They figured out that they couldn't finish the dam, so Dennis Washington took over the contract to finish the dam. And the process, it happened to put in my name, and I got on, and I worked in the summertime for 2 years. And one day I was complaining about, that was a long drive, 125 miles one way from Missoula. So he bought me a brand new airplane and built me out a landing strip.
What kind of plane was it?
It was a 180 Cessna, single motor 180 Cessna, which would cruise about 180 miles an hour. about 40-minute flight from Missoula to where he's working, in 2 hours of tough driving on the secondary highway.
That was the days of the old highway between Missoula. That was the old highway built by the convicts too, wasn't it? Real narrow and followed every hill.
Part of it was Old Mullen Road.
Yeah.
Right, built by Colonel Mullen. Well, the hell, well, incidentally, that I was a recruiter after the war. I recruited, the military had a recruiting deal that recruited women to, in those days women they didn't have any women in the Air Force, except on the ferry command. So that summer I went out and recruited 18 women, and they bought me a brand new Cessna 2 because I was actually recruited 18 women into the American military. I can't even remember the name of the service now, but it was that was the one that was doing the recruiting for the ferry command was Amelia Earhart, and she got lost over in the Pacific, and nobody knows what happened to her. Got good ideas. Japs probably got her.
Well, yes, they say there's a theory that she was working for the government, kind of checking out on what the Japanese were doing with their empire over there.
I don't buy that shit. I think she just, hey, the Pacific Ocean is a 7,000-mile hop. With the same thing would have happened to Lindbergh if he'd have done it on the...
Yeah.
But the Atlantic is only 3,000 miles. But who knows? She was flying. That was an airplane called 125. It was built by Lockheed. And I think that she probably, this is my own idea, that when you're going heading west out of the United States across the Pacific, you're going to be bucking the headwind, and the higher you get, the worse the wind. What she probably did was bucking a 200-mile-an-hour heroin, and she ran out of gas and became shark food somewhere out in the ocean. And a lot of people say, well, the Japs got her. I says, forget about the Japs. They couldn't, they're a race of people. I don't think they even know who Amelia Earhart. I've asked a couple Japs I know, and they don't even know who the hell she is, so maybe.
They were pretty smart, though. Yeah. The Japanese Zero, I understand, was based on Howard Hughes's Hurricane. They were able to get the plans for it.
They did. That's right. They lost the last war, but look at it's number.
They had the best fighter plane.
Financial credits, they're #1 in the world today.
Yeah.
So that proves one thing: the Japs are a damn sight smarter than Americans.
Well, I understand that it was Howard Hughes's design that didn't get it, that the Defense Department didn't buy, and somehow or other the Japanese were able to acquire the plans for it.
Oh yeah, sure is.
It took 2 of our planes to shoot down 1 Zero, as I recall reading.
Yeah, Jap Zero was a plywood airplane.
Yeah.
That could outfly anything we had.
Of course, Howard Hughes designed it.
Yeah.
Talk about the planes you flew when you were in the Army Air Corps.
She's anything Ryan's.
Talk about your first trainer with a gull wing.
Yes, that was a Ryan trainer. A long-wing airplane with 5-cylinder airplane, and the fly bottom side up just as good as most airplanes right side up. And Ryan's, they had BT-18s. I got a list of theirs, all the Cessnas, and of course twin motor Cessnas. And then you got, after I got in the military, there was DC-2s, DC-3s, 127s, 137s, and then we finally, the last military plane I flew was a B-17. That was built in Los Angeles, and that was when the Ford Motor Company was allowed to build them. But the Americans didn't like Ford Motor Company airplanes because, well, I don't think anybody that builds automobiles is qualified to build an airplane that's safe. And it's turned out it's right in most cases.
You had to dip all your wings before you'd fly one, all right?
Example was old Hughes with his foot. these goose.
Well, if he'd have had powerful enough engines, that thing would have flown, right?
Well, I would say that the problem would be, yes, it would fall. If you have the motors you got today, but the trouble with the motors, I'm talking about 5,000 horsepower, guess about 1,170.
Uh-huh.
I would say that would be with a 20,000 horsepower on a pilot airplane that ripped the motor mounts right out of that plywood, just about like a,
Oh yeah, it's wood
like
now.
the winds that come in from the ocean, do it in the houses in
But
Florida.
it did fly. It got off the ground, off the air, and then landed. It was in the water. It was like a.
But hey, I don't know why the hell I didn't take it up a little. I mean, 15 feet. That sure as hell isn't high enough for you to maintain a cross-country flight.
Well, I don't think he could get it to go, but much better, is what I understand.
Never. I think he copied. I think he got his ideas from Jap Zero. Jap Zero was the same problem. It was an underpowered airplane, but for example, during the war, they could dive down. That way they pick up a tremendous speed and they could come up underneath a P-38 and shoot it down. And they did it. But that was due to more to the ability of those Japs. They knew the Japanese plan. They figured that everybody's expendable. For American airplanes all had armor plate behind the pilot. They had armor on the floor. They had an inch of boiler plate. So when the aircraft come up underneath, you wouldn't blow your legs off. And the Japs planes didn't have any armor or nothing. And that's why hey, a few of them could outmaneuver, but today, I don't think that anything that Japan or any other country builds could, even the Russians with their so-called hotshot airplanes that are built in Prague, Czechoslovakia, I don't think they could shoot down one of our new airplanes, because we got some airplanes that fly 4 times the speed of sound, and I just don't think that. Of course, you got to remember one thing: the MiG airplane was built for observation. 90%, there were photographic cameras. All of them have that. The back seat was strictly for photographing any installations that they could drop a bomb on. So there's a lot of difference. But undoubtedly, those Czechoslovakians are brilliant airplane builders. But today, who knows? The MiG was pretty well established back when the World War I ended, but you don't hear much about them anymore. Of course, there's a lot of them around, but hey, yeah, like that guy in Hamilton had 4 of them. Hey, you're not allowed to fly one of them because it's not legal without permission from the American military. And hey, they don't give anybody permission to fly a plane over an Army installation today. So that's a big problem. Hey, like when I was flying once, I'm down there in California and I make a mistake of cutting across the military installation. 20 seconds later, here comes, so that was back in the 103s, here comes 3 103s, they were going to shoot me down, but they seen my American number on there, but they followed me. I went and landed in a military airbase. Guess what? After I got through peanut and potatoes, they turned me loose. But hey, the military don't want to put up with anything like that. But Jesus, it was a good thing. Because hey, the way it looks today, I might have to go back to work because just like carpenters, can't get nobody to work anymore.
How many houses did you build?
Well, ones I've got documented with 108 that I've documented. But I've only, now when I say how many houses I built, I got to be careful. The houses I built, it means the concrete, the wiring, the plumbing, the roofs, everything. There isn't.
Okay, so you've helped.
My son had never built a house in his life. He hires it done, but then he lives in Colorado, and people with 3.5 million people, you can get and he gets his help from out of Mexico City. But he's never built a complete house. He admitted the other day.
But you've built more structures than 108. Then you've helped on some, and yeah.
If I was to say, when you say built, I don't know what you mean. If you mean just hiring a crew, I'd probably I built Ed Hopen, for example, 4 eightplexes up on the hill. But one of them I built. I and one other guy built that. The other 3 I hired a crew of 8. So I never said I built them. I don't even count them.
Talk about the last house you built.
Huh?
Talk about the last house you just finished.
It was built in up in the Bitterroot Valley. It was built in Corvallis. And they built that. It was in 1994, and they built it up on a creek called it's Mill Creek Road. And that was the house I built was what you call a prefab 108. There's only 900 square feet, and I built that. I cut it all out right here in my garage on my table saw and hauled it up there. And then I trained a guy and taught him how to lay it out. I told you that story. He was a Mormon, and that'll give you an idea. Today, I'd be still building houses. He's got a job now. He's working in Hamilton. He's making in $28 an hour. So it shows you that housing today, like my son, I just found out he's paying carpenters $35 an hour. But the last time I was down there, the scale was 8. That shows you what's happening in housing. And I don't even know what a plumber makes an hour in Missoula because most union guys don't want to talk about it.
Do you have any messages that
Huh?
Do you have any wisdom that you could impart to the people of Missoula and based on your experience in life? Because we've only got 4 minutes left on the tape. So, do you have any advice for the world? You're welcome to expound.
Oh, Christ, there's home builders. Go to the old Hellgate High School. They have a course in how to build a house. And today, building a house is mostly everything is prefab. And the thing you got to learn, house building today is all done with air. You don't have to learn how to run an air primer and build a house. And the reason I say that, because there's no such thing as affordable housing. And that's what's the problem in Missoula, Montana is the same as everywhere else, is nobody can afford a house out of the income that they're making in the United States. So my answer to the question is learn how to build a house, because building a house is simple. It's borrowing the money and finding a banker who will loan you the money and paying out all the interest for, like on a $300,000 house on a 30-year interest, the house costs you $600,000. And I learned all this the hard way. That's why I'm saying what I'm saying. But I don't expect you. Hey, nobody listens to an old guy because, gee, someday I'm going to take you around and show you some of the houses I built for you. You won't think they're all like this is.
We'll save them for the next time. We'll use a video camera, and you can describe them, and I'll take a picture of them, and you can talk about them.
I built, Jesus Christ, most of my houses are in this area, but hey, right up on the hill, not to change the subject.
That's all right.
Right up on the hill, there's in the paper, a guy buys this house, and he comes home, and the place is plastered with tumbleweeds. It shows it in the house. And you don't buy a house out in the Goonies where the tumbleweeds can fence you in like. But number 2, if you're going to build a house today, learn how to build it with solar energy, triple thermal pane windows, and fireproof insulation. Otherwise, you're going to get fried alive. And like, oh, put my point, this guy next door, hey, you know those fire alarm detectors? When the battery gets down, it chirps. So one day he's over, he took the thing out and he was going to throw it away, and I saw him. So I guess all I had to do is go buy him another 39-cent battery. But then, you know, I don't expect Indians to run the housing business.
So tell me, you got about another minute.
Huh?
You got another minute. So you have any advice about, I don't know, anything? Just life in general.
Huh?
Any advice for anybody in life in general? You got a minute left.
Oh yeah. Well, my advice.
Actually,
this is advice of an old guy, and remember, it's based on my age is 90 plus. My advice to anybody today is don't ever take life seriously. Number one, don't ever take life seriously, because you can't get out of it alive. And number two, don't base all your thinking on money, because why? There is no pockets in a shroud. And number three, my best answer to the world is what I just told my son, and I've even adapted a musical tune to it, is MICKEYMOUSE, key final.